Shalom and welcome to our class today. The Jewish world changed because of the Second World War. Obviously, the loss of 6 million of any people, even if that happened today in China or India, where their populations are over 1 billion, would suffer significantly if 6 million were suddenly taken. But when our Jewish global ranks only numbered nearly 17 million in 1939. To lose 1/3 of the nation, that's a devastation. The remainder of the Jewish population scattered, not reckoning a return to their homelands would allow them safety, and Jewish migration continued even so far as coming to Australia. Here in 1901, at the time of Federation, the population of the country was less than 4 million people, only 15,000 of whom were Jewish. During and then after the Holocaust, the Jewish escape took us as far away from Germany and Poland as possible, and in 2011 our numbers had swelled to over 100,000. But when I say the Jewish world changed, I'm not only referencing population and evacuation. I'm referencing Jewish thinking as well. To be fair, making the point that Jewish thinking is singular is both dismissive and puerile. There have always been thinkers who thought outside the proverbial box in the Jewish world. Think Einstein, Spinoza, Moses Mendelssohn, primary examples. So when I say Jewish thinking, what I'm referencing is the general mood or majority concept that finds its way into most, well, certainly the plurality of the Jewish people in an area or even globally. For instance, just now, even though there are several major denominations of Jewish people with respective synagogues and temples, Jewish thinking today is significantly concerned with tikkun olam, even if less than half the people who are so concerned don't know the term. Tikkun olam, repair of the world, morphs into making the world a better place. That's global issue number one in the philosophical mindset of our people. Internal concerns of Jewish people might also include Jewish maintenance, like intermarriage or conversions. But the not only us perspective almost always includes tikkun olam. Those of you on this call who are messianic, that is, believers in Yeshua as Messiah, would aver that Jewish people are, or at least should be, concerned about the coming of Messiah. Certainly, that was 1/13 of the thinking of Jewish people when Rambam, Maimonides, wrote his 13 Articles of Faith in the 12th century, where he lived in Spain. In 1885, the Jewish world self-edited again, and I think a shift away from a personal Messiah significantly began to be noticed. Combine that doctrinal movement and the Shoah, and now we who are alive in 2023 are the result of such. Most Jewish people today do not believe in a personal Messiah, nor think of Judaism even as a religion, rather as a community among all the other religious communities. And our main task is to get along with and bring social justice to the globe. With that as an overview of our Messianic amendments, I want to talk to you today from our chapter, Zechariah 9, and use a personal anecdote to showcase all we can learn from this ancient and sacred text. If you don't mind, please read the chapter before you come to the class live, and if you're watching there on YouTube, pause your playback, read chapter 9, and then rejoin us. Thanks. Welcome back. The year was 1971. I was a 19-year-old hippie living in Kansas City, where I'd grown up. I had returned to my birthplace after dropping out of university, hitchhiking around the South, that region of the United States not exactly known for political openness and certainly in those days not known for welcoming us long hairs and guitar-toting hitchhikers. Even so, that's where I found myself when 4 Southern Baptists surrounded me on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. They harangued me and announced to me that Jesus was the Messiah. I told them I was Jewish. That didn't seem to move their thinking or their intentions. They had Bibles and biblical answers to anything and everything. Even though I wasn't asking them questions, these men certainly had Messiah on the mind. Even though I was a Jew and still then a practicing one, and even though I'd heard of Messiah, if I had to take an examination on the subject, I would have answered yes to the question, do you believe in the Messiah? I still didn't think about it that much. Many people in our days, certainly those who survived the Shoah, have split thinking on this. Some, and dare I say most of our people, respond with thoughts like, if there were a God, and if he really cared about our people, why didn't he save those 6 million? Others will say, if a Messiah were coming, he should have come long before Auschwitz. To be fair, there are many who continue to hold on to the historical Jewish thought of Maimonides that though he tarry, the Messiah, yet I will wait for him. Today, I'm going to tell you of an episode later in that year, 1971, that forever shaped my thinking personally, and maybe it will help you as well in considering this Messiah issue. Also, I'm not the focus of the author of this chapter, Zechariah 9, and I want you to see the plan of God clearly as Zechariah announced it, so that whoever you are, believer or not yet a believer, you will draw comfort from God's eyes across the world. Let's dive in. The first section, God's plan for some nations, the coming of the warrior, verses 1 to 8. Verse 1, this is extremely difficult in the Hebrew, and there is no verb. That makes it hard. The term for oracle is not always used. We don't know the subject and we don't know the object, but otherwise the sentence is fairly clear. Basically, the section is introducing us to the complex considerations of God in relation to the nations that were around the Jewish people. What nations are those? Let me show you a map for you online. All right, bottom left, you can see Philistia, what we call today the Gaza Strip. From Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, you'll see that. The pink is Israel, and by that we mean the northern 10 tribes. The northern 10 tribes, Megiddo, like you know of Armageddon, down to Shechem and Jericho. The purple at the bottom, that's Judah, that's the bottom 2 tribes, the southern 2 tribes, and you can see at the top of that is Jerusalem, Lachish, Judah. To the east is Moab, north of that is Ammon, north of that is Aram, like where Aramaic comes from. The green is Aram, and you can see in the center of that is Damascus. Damascus, of course, the capital of modern Syria. It was the head of the Assyrian world in those days. To the left or west of that, you see Tyre and Sidon, that's Tzor and Sidon in Hebrew, and the yellow says that section is called Phoenicia. Now keep going north and you see at the top Ugarit, like as in Ugaritic, and then Hamath is up top there at the very north, way north of Phoenicia and Aram. Basically, the section is introducing us to the complex considerations of God in relation to the nations around the Jewish people. What nations are those? It starts up north with Syria, or what we call today Syria, moves south to Phoenicia, namely Tzor and Sidon, or Tyre and Sidon, which is in Lebanon today, and finally lands us in Philistia with the Gaza towns mentioned. Verse 1, the translation of the verse is all over the place, but it is probably best to retain the difficult reading of the eve of man and understand it as a subjective genitive, belong to Yahweh. That is, the eyes of the Gentiles and all the tribes of Israel should be on Yahweh. Let's deal with the geography. Each of the three areas will experience different outcomes. First is up north, Syria. We read, even as far as Hamath. That is beyond the scope of the land of Judah and even Israel in the days of Zechariah, and certainly beyond today's boundaries, but it indicates that in the Messianic age, the government of the Lord of the whole earth will extend way up north into Assyrian territory, way north of Damascus. And the point is that this territory will be godly. Verse 1 says, Ki la Adonai, for unto the Lord. The next settled territories are not so fortunate, however. Verses 2 to 4, Tyre and Sidon, self-endowed, self-strengthened, are gathering stuff, and their accumulation, even of wisdom, is highlighted. Their wisdom, their wealth, and their weaponry are not enough to prevent God's judgment to fall on them. Verse 4 says, God will dispossess her. Note, the verb is singular, and yet Tyre and Sidon are two, but in their dismissal by God, they are as one. The third geography, the third geographical section, is Gaza today, and back then Philistia. Verses 5 to 8 lists 4 of the 5 cities along the coast from Ashdod, the usual 5 towns, but one is missing. The sound of judgment actually produces something good here. We read, Ashkelon will see it and be afraid. Gaza too will writhe in great pain. Also Ekron, for her expectation has been confounded. Moreover, the king will perish from Gaza. Ashkelon will not be inhabited, and a mongrel race, the Hebrew is mamzer, meaning bastard, race will dwell in Ashdod. And I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. I'll remove their blood from their mouth and their detestable things from between their teeth. And they will also be a remnant for our God and be like a clan, Ka'alef, like a chief in Judah, and Ekron, like a Jebusite. Jebusite, that means Jerusalem. I will encamp around my house because of an army, because of him who passes by and returns, and no oppressor will pass over them anymore, for now I've seen with my eyes. The removal of penalty and the inclusion into the house of God is staggering. Ekron become like a Jebusite? That's Jerusalem. Verse 8, my house and God encamping there, and God's eyes are there. This stanza is making Philistia into a community that's welcomed and formerly detestable, formerly bastardized, now with pride removed and blood, somehow related to the food they ate, removed from their mouths. This is a picture of godliness. Verse 7, like a clan in Hebrew, Ka'alef, like a chief. This is seriously what we might call inclusion. For years, I read this, beginning of Zechariah 9, as a judgment on all 3 of these geographical areas, but now I see this portion of Zechariah 9 as a hint of what is coming, that the Lord of all the earth, whose kingdom is coming, whose king is coming, has the intention of bringing in the foreigners, and they also will be his. The second section today, Shiloh on a donkey, the coming of the king, verses 9 and 10. Verse 9, this is where the story zooms in on the method of bringing salvation to the territories, and dare I say, to Judah as well. I'm not sure that salvation was on the mind of our father Jacob when he prophesied back in Genesis 49. I'll read it for you in a moment, verse 11, about Judah, and he pre-broadcast this scene. Jacob uses very similar language as here in verse 9, but I read the Genesis account as talking about abundance and prosperity. Here's what it says. Remember, there we read of Jacob's prophecy to his 4th son, Judah. He said this, quote, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He ties his foal to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine and his robes in a blood of grapes." End quote. Shiloh, later we know this to be Messiah, but for Jacob, just read this as a prediction on the first horizon. When Shiloh comes, the abundance of produce will be so great that you can tie your donkey to a grapevine. The vine then would be strong enough to function as a hitching post. Your donkey is safe. Your investments will be safe. That's how the people of Jacob's time, his sons and larger family, would have heard the prediction. In a few minutes, I'm going to share the story of my encounter with a rabbi in 1971 that shaped my thinking about this passage to this day. Who is this humble donkey rider? Jewish interpreters love to highlight the effectiveness of this donkey rider. He'll make things happen, which sections 1 and 3 advance. Verse 10, what does he do? He's speaking peace to the nations. Now that's obviously an admission of control and repair in the military and political troubles of his past. His dominion, it says, will be far-reaching from sea to sea, or if you're an American, from sea to shining sea. And that phrase, which persists in Zechariah, to the ends of the earth, you've seen it, ad afsei haaretz, this is not only a description of geography, but to the nations, to the peoples. Again, I'm thinking of Jacob's prophecy to Judah that to this Shiloh, to him shall the gathering and obedience of the people, the tribute of the peoples be. There are taxes and pledges of loyalty to the ends of the earth, and from the ends of the earth they will come. But look what verse 9 says. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He's just, endowed with salvation, humble, mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. But now the long-awaited story. The year was 1971. I was 19 years old and change. In May that year, I was found by Messiah and came to believe that Jesus, that Yeshua was our Messiah. I quickly told my family, not advised. And within hours, I was asked by my parents to exit their home. I booked and moved into a new apartment. It was a traumatic time, but a most significant one. A couple of months later, and I'm not sure of the circumstances, did he invite me or did I invite myself to the rabbi study? Honestly, I don't remember. But that summer of 1971, I remember being with Rabbi Maurice D. Solomon in the office of Kehilloth Israel Synagogue when it still existed on Meyer and Rock Hill in Kansas City, Missouri. We had a lively, albeit frank and confrontational conversation about my recent change of faith, as he said, and he wanted me to return to Judaism. We traded Bibles, my King James Bible version for his Hebrew English, both hardback. We traded Bible quotes. I was out of my league, to be sure, in this gospel witness. At one point, the rabbi admitted with words like these. He said something like this, look, we know that there are two pictures of Messiah in Tanakh, Messiah the son of Joseph and Messiah the son of David, Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David, both in one chapter of the scriptures, Zechariah Perek Tet, that's Zechariah chapter 9, says that he will come into Jerusalem on a donkey or he will come on the clouds. That's what the rabbi said. Two clear pictures, two very different actions by the Messiah. That means, he explained, we as Jews, as the prophet has been warning us chapter after chapter, have a choice. We can welcome him, we can welcome the Messiah on a donkey or on the clouds. What causes him to come in either of those methods? Our righteousness, our sinfulness. Here's what he meant. He went on. If all Israel lives sinfully, Messiah will come on a donkey and deliver us. If all Israel lives faithfully, if we observe the mitzvot and keep Torah as Orthodox Jews, Messiah will come on the clouds. I processed this for only a moment. I've processed it again and again for the next 52 years. What I said then, I would still say today. Rabbi, I think you've just convinced me that Jesus is our Messiah. My explanation was probably weak then, but it boiled down to this. Where in Tanakh do we read of Israel's faithfulness? Where in the prophets, or even Moses' swan song, do we hear of God bragging about how we keep Torah? Most of the time, God is calling us back to faithfulness because we have failed him. If Rabbi Solomon's thesis is right, then Messiah has to come on the donkey and save us. But listen, he's only half right. The two pictures, the two Messiahs, are actually one Messiah coming twice. Yes, we lived sinfully, and Messiah had to come on a donkey. Then at the end of days, which God knows, we don't, he will send Messiah yet again. We who are the redeemed, who keep his love and commands for all people, he will come in the clouds of glory, as Daniel predicted, as Zechariah says here, as John the Revelator says in chapter 1 of Revelation. I'm sure we shook hands. We kept our books that we traded. Rabbi Solomon made Aliyah and died in Israel many years later. If he was honestly seeking God, the Lord would surely have made my words clear to the rabbi. We'll see in due course, Verse 10 says, and he will speak peace to the nations. Again, the hint is becoming louder, like Bolero's earliest themes continuing in the rest of the orchestral piece by Ravel. Nations will come to the Lord. Nations can be included in God's economy. There is a place for Gentiles along with Jews in God's eyes. The hint is increasing. The Lord wants to be Lord over all the earth. Our third section today, summary blessings to the victorious cloud rider, or sharing in the victory, verses 11 to 17. Now, this third section of today's class is found here from verse 11 to the end, and Bishop Steed broke this down into 4 separate units. I'm going to use those. I like them. Verse 11 is the release. Look what it says right there. I will free your prisoners from the waterless pit. Isaiah 42 says, this is a people plundered and looted, all of them trapped in pits or hidden away in prisons. Remember, Jeremiah said, we've done 2 real bad things. His prophecy about the sin of Judah was that we trusted in cisterns which hold no water. It could also be a reference to the empty pit of Joseph, sold by his brothers to the traveling nomads, remember, who got him to Egypt, and covenant blessings even there. Emptiness, waterless pits, and yet going to the well. What a waste. What a pretense. Release, it says, from falsehood. That's how I want to define this verse. That's so huge in our mechanical understanding and deployment of religious activity. Matthew West sang the song, I don't want to go through the motions. I don't want to go one more day without your all-consuming passion inside of me. What if I had given everything instead of going through the motions? Religion and its commensurate hypocrisy, God says he'll release Judah from this prison. And how is this release possible? Verse 11 tells us, it's the blood of the covenant which will free us. The next verse, 12, is a second promise of restoration, according to the bishop. The hint of double blessing is clarified in this verse, which sounds like an exact opposite or a change from the double problem of Isaiah 40 and Jeremiah 16, which said we'd be doubly punished for our sin. It could be countermanded by the grace of the Lord and the word of his testimony. Blood and covenant, again, applied to the people of God. Without both, we are left in pain and emptiness and suffering. But here, due to the donkey riding Messiah, we can be restored to hope. Note the phrase in verse 12 about prisoners of hope. Verse 11, verse 12, the use of asidoe, or prisoners. We were held in chains, and now the result of the blood, the covenant, and the word make us prisoners of hope. This is not only hope for temple restoration, but peoplehood. When we are broken, without hope, we need the Almighty to give us hope by relating to and being in relationship with Him. Read the Psalms, whether Psalm 18, Psalm 46, it's all throughout there that call on us to hope in God, my refuge, my shield, my stronghold, the horn of my salvation. Hope is personal and springs eternal for those whose hope is in the living God and not in man's solutions or treaties or self-capacity. Verses 13 to 15, Bishop said this, it's about victory itself. Who are the weapons? Why would a people be a weapon? But he says Ephraim and Judah, Ephraim the north, meaning Israel, and Judah the south. These two kingdoms are now functioning as a unit. How did that happen? By the blood of the covenant. And wait, it's not only the people of God who are weapons, arrows, bows, swords, but now God Himself joins the armies. We've called Him Adonai Tzvaot throughout this prophecy, Lord of the armies, and now He takes the battlefield Himself. Verse 15 has that title, trumpeting ahead of the armies of Israel and Judah. Verse 14 is the one Rabbi Solomon cited. The Lord will appear over them and go forth like lightning. That's heavenly. That's from above. The rabbis have taught us that Messiah will fight for us, win the battles against our enemies, and here victory is won by God and by God's people. One more note on verse 15 showcases making noise as in a boisterous banquet. Then finally, the fourth section of the last of chapter 9 is salvation, verses 16 and 17. For those who've read ahead into chapters 10 and 11, you'll see the shepherd of verse 16 will feature again, certainly in contrast to the false or bad shepherds next week, and the one who will suffer and be stricken later. Hold on to those thoughts. What is great about this final thought in chapter 9 is the tender care of a shepherd. He was a warrior a moment ago, fighting Adonai Tzvaot, and now he will save the flock. That's tender. Okay, it's also the result of a warrior shepherd, which makes sense in context, but don't miss it. Yeshua, the gentle shepherd of the flock of God's people, will go to war on our behalf. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God for the tearing down of strongholds and every lofty thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. And we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Messiah. The scenes of chapter 9 make this one of the most compelling chapters in the Bible, especially for us who know the suffering one, who rides in what people call the triumphal entry. Ha! What a misnomer. He rides into Jerusalem a few days before Passover, almost 2,000 years ago. And Yeshua is hailed as king. And it's so close you can almost taste the victory. But his kingdom is a now and not yet kingdom. He's riding on the donkey, not the clouds, to bring suffering, sinful Israel back into covenant relationship with God. How? The same way as we read here, by his shed blood. By dying for us on the cross in just a few days after this event recorded in all four Gospels. He rode into Jerusalem as king, not on a white horse with military trumpets and accolades, but with humility and suffering in the forecast. The people got it wrong. The Romans got it wrong. We all get it wrong until we meet the one who is the suffering one, the donkey rider who brings salvation in his own manner. Don't miss it. You who don't yet know Messiah, today could be your day. Find salvation in the donkey rider, the Messiah Jesus. He's your life and your hope. Without him, we're doubly in trouble. With him, we're doubly blessed. How? What do you do now? You pray a simple prayer, and you ask him to be your salvation and your Messiah. He wants to forgive you your sins and make you born again to a living hope, not a dead hope, a living hope. I'm going to say a prayer. Just join me right where you are. Use your own words if you want. Father, forgive me, please, for all the sins I've committed. Make me born again. I trust that Yeshua, who rode into town in Jerusalem on a donkey, is my salvation. And he cares for me, and he's going to win the battle. So many battles in my life. I trust that you will take care of me and shepherd me in these days. Give me brothers and sisters with whom to walk. Fill me with your Holy Spirit that I might live for you. In Yeshua's name. You pray something like that. You pray that kind of prayer. And then write to me, will you, bob@jewsforjesus.org.au, and tell me what you've done. We'll support you. We'll encourage you. We'll be right there with you. More importantly, the shepherd of Israel will be right there with you, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. This is good news for all of us. Shabbat Shalom.